A já bez dalších okolků teda přivítám Charlese. On mě poprosil, protože je skromnej, abych ho nějakým způsobem představil a nemusel to dělat sám. Takže za chvilku switchneme do angličtiny, já ho ještě rychle představím v češtině. Takže pracoval a vyvíjel jednu z prvních aplikací na iPhoneu kompletně pro NASu, což je velmi zajímavý. Potom dělal evangelistu ohledně UX a produkťáka v rámci Apple. Pak pracoval na dalších velmi zajímavých startupech a všechno to know-how, který on tam nazbíral, tak dneska nakumuloval. Takže nebojte se jít hodně do hloubky a přes slajdu mu pokládejte otázky hodně do hloubky. A bez dalšího zdržování, welcome here. We are really happy to have you here, Charles.
Thanks, Dalipor. Can you guys hear me in the back? Okay, great. Man, I'm so happy to be back. So like Dalipor said, right now I'm traveling the world as a digital nomad, and I spent my last month here. And right now I'm in Belgrade, so I had the opportunity to come and give a talk to you guys. I jumped at the chance. It's like, I'm only here for 48 hours, but I'm so happy to be back. So, dobrý den, and thanks for coming. So today we're going to talk about mobile UX design. Who out there has an idea for an app? Some people? Okay, great. Who's done UX design before? Okay, some of you guys. Okay, great. So today I'm going to share with you guys the process that I go through to design blockbuster apps. And I've worked for a lot of different organizations, ranging from government to large companies to small startups. And this is the same process that I use every single time to design a great user experience. And throughout the talk, I'm going to give you guys lots of examples so you'll know how the theory will apply to real life. So this is what we're going to talk about. The first thing I'm going to talk to you guys about is the process. So it's a 7-step process. And then I'm going to share some of role models. So basically apps that I think has a really good user experience, that whenever you have to solve a design problem, you can look at those apps for tips. And then I'll end with resources. So if you want to learn more and get deeper and really think about the details, you can check out those resources. So here's the process. So we're going to walk through every single one of those steps in between, but you essentially start off with an app definition statement. And as you form the idea of your app and you get more and more concrete, then you start to build more and more detailed specifications and requirements. So what is an app definition statement? Who's heard of that before? Awesome. Just a few people. So most people don't do this, and it will kill your project. Because one thing that's really different about designing an app is that it's super focused, right? It's not like a website where you can throw all sorts of different stuff on there, all have all sorts of different features, and it's pretty cheap to make. An app is very expensive to make, and the best apps that I've seen do one thing really, really well. So an app definition statement is a concise, concrete declaration of an app's main purpose and its intended audience. So what this means is basically you want a one-sentence thesis that describes to detail what your app does and who is it for. So 2 parts. What does it do and who is it for? So here's an example. My first app was NASA's first iPhone app. And it's an app that easily let the public get NASA content, right? So who is it for? The public, exactly. And then what does it do? Delivers NASA content. Now this might seem really, really simple, but let me give you some examples of how having a statement like this really helps later on in the project. So 3 months in, our app was about 80% done. And some of the stakeholders in the organization, they weren't part of the app team. They said, hey, what if you build in this feature to highlight this mission to Mars a little bit more? Because the Mars missions, they have a lot of money. And if we highlight those missions more, then there's a chance that our team can get more funding. So do we want to do that? No, because if you look at the app definition statement, we're designing it for the public. We're not designing it for other members of the organization to move funding around. At the end of the day, we design it for the users. So when you have a statement like this, and when you get everyone to agree on the statement in the beginning, later on, when you get all these different people that tries to dilute your vision, that tries to take away what the app does, you go back to the statement, and it really reminds you who the app is for. Here's another example. So this is a passion project of mine before. It's called Common Links, and it's an app that easily let two strangers discover what they have in common. Because I don't know if you ever had this situation, but you go to a bar and then you meet somebody and you're like, oh cool, I wonder if we know the same people. So then you put in each other's names in Facebook and you're like, holy crap, I have like 20 friends in common with you. Who's had that happen to them before? Yeah, it happens pretty often, right? So wouldn't it be cool if you can just have an app with one touch? It'll show you, here are all the friends that you have in common, here are the music players that you have in common, and here are all the restaurants and all the other things that you have in common in just a few seconds. So that was our vision, and the statement is an app that will easily let two strangers discover and have in common. So that's Common Links. Can somebody remind me what that app definition statement is? What does Common Links do? Oh, so that's what the app definition statement is, but what does Common Links?
It allows strangers to
discover what they have in common. Right, so another value of the app definition statement is it's easy for you to tell people what it does. So if you're in an elevator, there's like an investor, it's like, oh, what do you work on? I'm working on an app. What does the app do? It's an app that lets two strangers find what they have in common. So the statement not only focuses your product, it also helps you share it and tell people about it. And the more detail you can get about it, the better. And as your project gets built, it gets designed, you're gonna go through this phase of melting and solidifying over and over again, right? After you have this statement, you're gonna have a lot of features like, oh, we wanna share mutual friends, we're gonna share mutual music taste, all of this. So that requirement's gonna melt. But then you go back to the statement and you said, all right, out of this whole list of features, what do we really want to do in the first version of the product? And then you solidify it again. So it goes back and forth, back and forth. So now you have an app definition statement. It's time for you to build a feature backlog. And a backlog is basically a list of all the things that you want to have in the app. It's pretty much just like a to-do list, right? So with Common Links, we didn't want people to put in their data manually. We just want to get all that data from all the social networks out there. So the moment you sign on with Facebook, you know automatically who they're friends with, which musicians they like, all this data. So that was top priority for us. And then you have all these different screens that you have to build. And this is all the things that we need to have when we launch the product. So here's another example of a product backlog. And there's so many tools out there, that help you organize stuff like this. This is just a more powerful version. This is called a Pivotal Tracker. This tool is called Asana. So now you have a list of all the features that you have. What's next? Well, if you think about how a person uses an app, you're taken from screen to screen to screen, right? It's kind of like you're going on a journey. And the journey is helping the user accomplish a certain task. And let's say you want to do a road trip, right? If I want to go from Los Angeles all the way up to San Francisco, I have different methods of transportation. I can drive, I can take a train, and I can fly, and here are all the different paths of how to get there. So same thing with an app. The next thing you want to do is you want to map all these screens out and all these decisions out. And this is what's called a flow diagram. You start off on paper. You say, okay, if somebody wants to compare friends, all right, first you need to do a Facebook login, and then when we do a Facebook login, pull in all their data, and then show them, all right, here are all the things that we gathered from you. The next time you open up the app, are they already logged in or not? If they're not, then show them the login screen again. If they are logged in, then go down this path. So before you start with any design, you need to map every single one of these screens out. So later on, you know where the user is coming from and you know where they're going. So you start off on paper, And then you use tools like mDevTalk or Visio. You create these flowcharts that you can share with other people. So that was like a simple flowchart. This is a more complex flowchart. So one of the things I helped design was Ticketmaster's iPhone app. And it wasn't just about buying tickets. It was about finding events that you can go to. It was about sharing those events with other people. It was about taking what you have in your phone that has all the music and then finding events out there. It's about finding where the venue is that's playing that concert. So it's a very, very complex app. And before we did the design, we mapped every single screen out. And every single one of those things in orange represents a screen. Everything mapped in yellow represents a new screen. And then you'll see a green rectangle, and that represents all the different states that a screen can have. So now you have your flow diagram, you have your app definition statement, you have your feature backlog. It's time to create some wireframes. So a wireframe is basically the skeleton of an app, right? So it's just like when you're building a house. Even before you start building stuff, you want to have the blueprints. And think of this as the blueprint. It communicates functionality, it communicates layout, and it communicates data, but it doesn't communicate look and feel. So from this screen, you can kind of tell, okay, I want to start off with a login screen, and then after I logged in, it shows me what kind of information I'll be able to compare it to another person with. So you can see a back button in the upper left. You can see these 3 categories. The first one is friends, the second one is artists, the third one is places. And when you give this off to a developer, they'll be like, oh, okay, so I need to get different sources for these different types of categories and data, and this is the type of data that we want to show. So some might be pictures, some might be text. It really helps people visualize, one of your screens. And again, you always want to start with paper, and then from paper, you go off to one of the more powerful tools. So like mDevTalk or Balsamiq, or my favorite is a software called Axure. And after you're done with the wireframes, you go into mocks. So mocks is where you lay on a layer of the look and feel. This is where branding comes in. And this is where you basically show people this is what's going to look like on the screen. And now you have to be a lot more detailed, right? When you give this to a development team, they need to know exactly what type of font to use, what size of the font, what the color of the font is, how much padding it is from one button to the other button, what the dimension of the nav bar is. So now things are starting to get a lot more detailed, right? Now, a lot of people, like when they first start designing an app, they go straight for this step. But then later on, when they're like, oh, we actually want to build in this feature, they have to do a lot of rework. And creating something like this is pretty expensive. So the tools that you use are Sketch, Photoshop, InDesign, InVision, a lot of these industry standard graphic design tools. So what if you never design an app and you have no idea what kind of patterns to use? Well, fortunately, there's a lot of resources out there. A lot of them are free. So if you're designing an app for Apple's ecosystem, iOS, they have a great resource called the iOS Human Interface Guidelines. It's hundreds of pages long, and it basically tells you, here are all the different elements out of the box that you can use. This is when you use this gesture, this is when you use this gesture. Here are the standard sizes for a nav bar. Here are the standard navigation patterns. Is it a tab bar? Is it a hamburger button? All these like little intricacies will tell you pretty much how you should design like a standard app. And it's really important to read these guidelines because the more standardized and the more you follow these patterns, when you get to developers, the code that they'll have to work with, it's going to be a lot standard. They can just take pieces from Apple's resources, and they don't have to code stuff from scratch. And then when you give it off to users, they'll instantly know how to use it. They'll feel intuitive because they're used to using these common interaction patterns. So for Android, Google released Android Material Design Guidelines, and it covers the same thing. It'll tell you which type is the standard, what the different ways of showing animation are. So it's really, really detailed, and both of these are free resources. And then there are also some resources that's available online as courses. Stanford's got their iOS development course online from iTunes. Apple's got a lot of videos. Udemy's also got a bunch of videos. So there are full courses out there that can take you step by step in terms of creating an app. So now we have the mocks. Are you ready to code it yet? Not yet. Not quite. Because so far, the team has been swimming in their own world, right? Every single idea has been pretty much like inside the team, and then you're designing it, you're building it, but you haven't really gotten it to a hand of users. And in between, where you have the mocks to actually shipping the app, is a lot of time and a lot of money invested. A lot of times, this is the most expensive phase of a project. Just giving it to a development team, because they're the most expensive people, and they have to code it up. And you want to make sure that you test the design right now, as quickly as you can, in front of users before you actually code it up. So how do you do that? You do that with a mobile web prototype. And this is one of the reasons why I like Axure. It's because if you just have these different mocks, and they're basically just different designs that look like a real app, you can connect all of them together, and it's basically just like a bunch of web pages, load it on a mobile device, and then you can go up to a person and be like, hey, check out my app. Can you show me how you would do this, right? And you can use this mobile app to do basic user testing even before you code it up. And you'd be so surprised at the amount of information that you can get back to improve your design even before you start coding it. So if I were designing a ticketing app, I would be like, hey, can you show me how you would buy a ticket? And then I would watch this person use it. And a lot of times, people will do it in an office setting because you're working in an office. But the best time to test this kind of stuff is not the office. When do people use their phones? Like all the time. You're waiting in line. So when I was designing one of my app projects, I used to go up to a bar at night at somebody's party. Like, hey, yeah, a couple of minutes. All right, show me how you would buy a ticket. So it's more like, show me how you would buy a ticket, because there's lots of music in the background. Because in reality, that's how people are using their mobile devices, and they're using apps. And you have to simulate that environment. So what do you think this word means? When you're making a button up there, how do you know when to use options, when to use transfer, when to use this word versus that word? And right now, you're just one person. But it'd be kind of interesting to see like what other people, how they perceive what different words mean. And a lot of times, what you think one word means might be totally different than the other person. And these are all the things that you can test even before you get to the coding stage. If you tapped on this button, what do you expect to happen? Now, bad user experience constantly surprises users in a bad way. A great user experience constantly surprises users in a great way, because it's kind of like, when I tap on this, oh, I see this screen. This is exactly what I expected. And a lot of times, if you design matches the user's expectations, you'll have an awesome app that's intuitive. What was confusing about it? If you see somebody using an app and they're kind of paused in a certain screen, like why did they pause? What wasn't clear to them? Maybe the size of the different buttons, or the size of the different elements wasn't big enough to show the most important thing. And the last question is, how did this app make you feel? So one of the awesome things that Apple does is they're so good at branding, and they're so good at just designing an emotional product. And they constantly think about, how does this product make somebody feel? Right? And it's kind of silly to think, well, how can I make this digital product make somebody feel a certain way? But if you look at just the design work they put in, you go to the iOS human interface guidelines, they talk about like how every single one of these themes will make people feel a certain way. It makes people feel intuitive, makes them feel like they're being productive. And these are all things that you can communicate with good design. So now you have mocks that are tested, made those tweaks. It's time to chop it up into different assets. So when you give a developer, screens, it's hard for them to work with that because they basically need the images and they need the name of the fonts and anything that's not out of the box for their toolkit. So an example here is with common links, these two phones are trying to figure out what these two users have in common, and there's a certain lag time. So within that lag time, we want to show something fun. So we showed a bunch of these colored balls like coming up, and it represented like all the things that we're discovering, all these things that these two people have in common. So in order to communicate that to a developer, we had to show them a storyboard, and we also had to define, okay, out of all the balls that are flying out, what color are they? What's the exact color code, and what's the exact size to the pixel, so then they can actually build it. And assets also mean icons. So icons give your users the first impression of your app. And it's super important because today, a phone doesn't just have one home screen. It's got multiple home screens because people download lots of different apps. So it's kind of interesting for us, or we went through this design exercise, and we're trying to come up with a really cool icon for common links. And in the beginning, we looked at the icons on the left. We're like, okay, I think the one in the upper left looks really good because it's pretty colorful. It's got the C. It makes sense. But we didn't go with it because we tested it. And we tested it by putting it on different home screens with a sea of icons. Because in reality, that's what people's phones look like, home screens. And if you look at the first icon, and you look at where it is in the 4 screens, it's going to be pretty challenging for you to find it because it's super colorful. So at the end, we went with an orange C with a white background. And this is the same reason why you look at a lot of those big tech companies like Facebook, Twitter, and all they do is they show a solid color with a tiny gradient, and they show like one letter because it really stands out. Because now you're in a competitive environment, and you're competing for people's attention, and you really want to present users with, this is what my app is, this is what the icon looks like, so they don't have to get lost searching for it. And part of designing for these devices nowadays means you have to support like a ton of different sizes, right? So you might design one icon that's in high resolution, and then you scale it to different pieces. But in order to publish an app, you need to have it ready for iPhone 6, iPad. Before you used to have to have 2 different resolutions, Retina and non-Retina. But these are all things that you have to plan for ahead of time. So what it means is when you're designing an icon, you want to save it in vector format. You don't want to just make one that's just to the pixel, because later on you're going to have to come up with at least 20 different icon sizes in order to publish to the store. All right, so that was the 7-step process that I go through every single time before I even get to the coding stage, right? Most of the time when people think about apps, they think about, oh yeah, let's just program it. But if you want a great app, you get to go through this process step by step. And when you get to the coding stage, the developers will build it, and you're going to ship it, and it's going to be a great product. Because let me tell you, if at the end of the coding stage, you're testing it and you realize, oh crap, this confuses people, it's going to be very, very expensive for you to go back, redesign it, go into the code, change it around, and then launch it again. So here are the 6 role models that I look at all the time for design problems. Settings is actually a really awesome app because there's so many different options that you can play with in there, and there's so many different interaction models, like so many switches. If you want to find a list of Wi-Fi networks, it'll show you a list, and then you have to select which one. It shows you the checkbox. So it's a great model for looking at standard interaction patterns in iOS. For Facebook, I like to look at them as a model for content presentation. So Facebook is the most popular app right now in the world. And if you can design a content presentation, like if you want to show pictures, if you want to show videos, they're always at the bleeding edge of presenting content. They're also going to be the first ones to show 360 video. they're a great model to look at. And people already know how to use Facebook. For e-commerce, I look at Ticketmaster because we pretty much spend a whole year redesigning our iOS app to make it awesome. So a lot of resources, time, and energy went into it. Venmo is another great app. It's like the fastest way to like transfer money to somebody, way better than the PayPal app. And the team has done a phenomenal job to make it super simple. Waze is a really good app to look at for custom branding. So right now, a lot of apps out there, you follow the standard iOS guidelines and the same Android guidelines. But every once in a while, there's an app like Waze where they're like, we don't really care about those guidelines. We want to give people our own like branding and our own feel. So they went and they did their own thing, and they actually turned out pretty awesome. So for custom branding, look at Waze. And then for Path, they're really awesome with animation. Because a lot of times, you'll notice when you go from one screen to another, there's that slide animation, right? All of those little subtle things that makes you feel a certain way, that the app is super polished, comes from animation. And a lot of times, Path puts in the resource to design all these things, and it looks amazing. So that was a bunch of role models, and I'm really passionate about good user experience design, and I'm super passionate about apps, because if you think about it, right, within a couple of months, you can design a product, and then when you upload it to the App Store or the Google Play Store, it gets instantly distributed to hundreds of countries in the world. And if you can find an app that solves somebody's need or somebody's pain, you can pretty much change the world. So I'm going to leave you guys with this one video that kind of shows you the possibilities of what an app can do.
I think a developer would look like a geek, nerdy, clad.
Unshaven, glasses, spiky hair, beard.
A guy behind a door that's got enough of a crack they can slide a pizza underneath.
I think you won't even know who a developer is. I think you'd be surprised.
I really don't know what a developer looks like, but the apps they make let us do amazing things.
You can talk about a project, you can articulate it rationally, but you cannot communicate architecture ideas without a drawing. I use an app called Paper by 53. It really provides a sense of freedom, a sense of being emancipated from technology. It allows you to communicate as if directly from your heart, from your soul. It's just part of you. And I think that magic is part of the app world.
The app I cannot live without is a banking app named 支付宝.
Airbnb saved my life. I talk to my friends.
Instagram, Tumblr.
Like blah, 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 blah.
Evernote. That's the one.
I'm addicted to Pinterest because it is amazing.
There's so much entertainment.
Dogfish.
It's limitless what you can do.
The ocean, for me, is the lungs of our planet. The health of the ocean is absolutely essential to the health of us as human beings. Pangaea runs a sailing expedition vessel to help scientists collect data on marine debris all around the world. There's a variety of apps that I use every day. iNavX is essential for us to be able to navigate the vessel. Marine Debris Tracker allows you to enter the marine debris you find into a global database so we can start to build up a bigger picture of this problem around the world. I think these apps are essential for us to be able to bring change to what's going on in the ocean.
Best app of all time has to be Tinder.
I'm most probably like the millions of people that's got sucked into Candy Crush.
Robot Unicorn Attack 2.
Crazy girl looking to meet new people in London. Interesting.
Words with Friends, Scrabble.
I play solitaire, and of course I always win.
We are stewards of dreams and hope for hitters. They come in and they want to achieve amazing things, and that's my job. Dartfish has just made my life so much easier. I'm able to break down the swing into parts so that you can see, okay, here's the mistake and here's the adjustment that I need to make. So what you have is a kid that can not only do it right, but then you can train him on doing it over and over and over. Now they're able to look and say, you know what, I'm getting better. And that's one of the things that you need for life in general, but in sports, you want hope. And so now it's easy for them to focus on dreaming.
We need like a silence finder app.
I gravitate toward very melancholy and painful songs.
It's time to turn the page. Whoop.
This has become as essential as my guitar.
There are apps that help people, that like really improve people's lives.
Every now and then I'll sort of stare at the hand with this sense of sort of wonder, going, wow. And it is like magic, it really is. In combination with the hand, the app has allowed me to gain functionality and independence. I enjoy being known as the kid with a bionic arm. You know, it's something interesting and it's something different, and I'm a big fan of being different.
You open up an app and you open up a possibility, and the whole world is being born. And what we really have is an intersection between technology and art. You see the world in a different way, and I think an app can do that because it really does open something you didn't know beforehand.
Developers are doing extraordinary things.
I can't believe what they're creating today. It's genius.
If I met the person that made Sky Go, I'd probably give him a massive hug.
You inspire me so much.
They make our lives better, and they think of things that obviously regular people can't think of.
I don't know how the technology works. It's just magic to me.
There's no question they are changing the world.
So to everyone who's made any apps that I've ever enjoyed, I say thank you.
So for those of you guys that have ideas for an app, I encourage you to go out there and build it, because it can really change the world. So thanks for coming tonight, and I hope you learned something.
Okay, thank you for the great talk, Charles. Just wait a second, and I will switch to the questions from the audience. Okay, so I guess okay, so how are you today, Charles?
I'm excellent.
Okay, perfect. So the second question is, if you decide to add or remove some features, do you go through the all mocking process again?
So the answer is maybe. It really depends on the feature. Because sometimes in your design, if it's resilient enough and it's pieced together in components, when you're at the development stage, you can take components out. In that sense, it'll be pretty easy. Now, if your design affects the navigation, then you have to start all the way back because it will affect a lot of other things. So another way to think about this, when you're designing, when you're going through these 7 steps, the deeper you go, the more locked in it is. And if changing, adding or removing these features will affect the design language and the interaction patterns of other things, then you have to go back and go through those steps again.
Okay, thank you. I think that answers the question. The next question seems to be on me. Is it possible to switch data projectors to have a presentation on the middle one, the one with the best contrast? Well, I know that this problem was there before, and I will try to do my best to switch it for the next presentation, but I really don't know how to operate with it, so wish me luck. And next question is again on you. So did you read the iOS guidelines in one go, or did you just look for the problems you need to solve?
I read it in one go. So even though it's a couple hundred pages, it's illustrated and it's really well written. And it's gone through so many different versions that I kind of look at it as like the design Bible for iOS apps. And like I really care about design and I'm really interested in it. So just going through it, it's like I'm learning so much. And then later on, I print that whole guideline out and I save it as a reference. So when I forget, when I'm actually approaching different design problems, I go back and I look at it. But in the beginning, if you don't have any background in design, it's a great way for you to quickly like learn a lot of different things.
Okay, the next one contains really a lot of smart words. So do you use tests without users, like cognitive walkthrough or heuristic evaluation?
Well, never gotten asked that question before. Cognitive walkthrough.
Good one.
What does that mean? What heuristic?
Okay, so if the author could explain it more.
Yeah, well, basically, you describe the test with users. You come to someone in bar and ask to go through my app and do something. And yeah, I have some background in user testing, and there are tests without users. And yeah, these are two of them. And basically, there are a set of rules that every action needs to be fulfilled. So I guess this answers my questions that you don't use them.
I guess I'm just not familiar with the terminology, but I think what you mean is like by rules you mean like different patterns.
Well, yeah, basically.
Like if you're running a test, like who are you testing if you're not testing users?
Well, yeah, basically you're testing the app against some patterns.
Yeah. Maybe the way I think about this is I start off with patterns and knowledge, like the human interface guidelines, and that teaches me the patterns, and it will give me some hypothesis that for this specific problem, this pattern is the best pattern to solve this problem. And then, so I don't think of it as a test. I see it as like a starting, like a beginning. And then later on, I'll use the patterns and I'll test the users.
Yeah, but everybody's can make mistakes. Sorry. And it happened to me that I forgot to give user feedback about some tasks, and these patterns are I think good. Check off your work basically.
Yeah, I think I take in the patterns and those give me inspiration. They give me a starting point, and I try to that's what the models are, right? Like settings, Facebook, all those things. There are patterns that I start with, but because my app is something that is new, that's not out there, then I will try to synthesize and take in all those patterns, but then I will kind of make my own. And it's a hypothesis. So later on, I have to test it with real users. Because if you're building something that follows a set of rules exactly, then it might not be an original app. It would just be that app.
Okay, so next one. Could you find the shuffle button in the latest version of Apple Music app?
So that's a really interesting thing about design is you think that when you first launch something, it will just get better and better and better. But with the music app, it's gotten worse and worse and worse. And believe it or not, it happens in companies all the time. Like if you look at the NASA app today, it's really, really crappy. Because what happens is, I left, and you start off with a team, right? The team builds a product. The product starts to take off. You get a lot of money, and now the team wants to evolve the product. Sometimes you evolve in a good way. Sometimes you evolve in a bad way. And once in a while, if you have somebody that really cares about design and really knows his stuff, you won't be afraid to go back and redo everything over again. If you look at the Facebook app, right? Like in the beginning, they had pretty simple profiles, and then they went into this tiled navigation pattern, and now they're back to the tab bar. And it's constantly going back and forth. But looking at some of the apps, I pretty much know what the organizational structure and how the team is evolving. And for my friends at Apple, a lot of really good people are leaving. And I actually had this conversation with somebody recently where right now, Johnny Ives, he's the head of design for everything. And Steve Jobs is not there anymore. And design is such an important topic that he just doesn't have enough bandwidth to take on and thoughtfully think through everything. And stuff like that just happens. So I guess the takeaway here is no, I really don't like how the Apple Music app has evolved. And if you're not careful and think about design, just like how if you're not careful about actual code and maintain it and refactor it, it can go the other direction, and then it can turn out to be pretty bad. I mean, with the Ticketmaster app, that's why we went through that whole redesign or design update, because we piled on so much design debt that we have to just say, all right, let's just start over. Now we have so many different features. Let's make a consistent, intuitive user experience for the entire app.
Okay, so regarding to the user test, how many people should you test to be sure you got rid of all possible mistakes?
Normally, after testing like 3 people, you'll know enough feedback to be like, okay, I need to focus on these areas. So I think like 2 or 3 people is enough. Now, of course, the more you test, the more information you're going to get. But I think if you go for 3, that amount of feedback that you get will flush out 80% of the problems.
Okay, so next one comes from all the designers of the world, I guess. How you handle the people that defines the budgets, but don't know anything about apps, but they have all these crazy ideas about improving the app.
That defines the budget. So, all right, so you're talking to like a business person or like a CEO, and they don't know anything about apps, but they have all these. Oh, so this is another reason why like a product backlog is good. So in the beginning, you have an app definition statement, right? The next thing is you have this backlog. So they'll be like, oh, I have this feature idea. And what you say is, that's a great idea. Let me put it in the backlog. Because the thing is, you don't have to do everything in the product backlog. You just gather their ideas. And it's up to you, or whoever's managing the team, to manage the priorities of what gets built. Because what that product backlog does is it also helps you estimate different features. So you can talk to your developers, you can talk to your designers, and then be like, all right, how much does this feature cost? And then when you have that list ready, you go back to the CEO and say, hey, look, I have these 20 features. This is the way I'm prioritizing them. We're only going to be able to do the first 5 features because of cost, and here's why. Present them with a big picture, and they'll understand. So I never turn down an idea. Like, it's always a good idea. It's just, it might not be the good idea like to build right now. And this is another reason why the app definition statement is so important. Because when you look at all these different features, you compare to the statement. And if you start off with a really detailed statement in the beginning, you'll be like, you know, this statement doesn't really map to the like feature 15, 12, or whatever. So we're not going to build that just because it's not falling in line with our app definition statement. So that statement will be your guide and your northern light, and it'll help you focus the app. And the earlier you have that, and like you can go back to your CEO and say, hey, that's a great idea, but you know, remember what we talked about? Like, this is our app definition statement. It doesn't really fall in line with that. All those little things, assets that you create will help you in those discussions.
Okay, so this is the similar question to the previous one. What do you think about the new designs of Apple Maps, Apple Music, etc., with the swipe up drawer paradigm?
Yeah, I think Apple design has gone backwards. So a lot of these new paradigms, it takes me a while to get used to. And I think in the beginning, when there's an absence of features, the patterns are simple. So now it's gotten worse. Like, I just updated to iOS 10, and just looking at the Mail app and having so many different little like boxes and so many different typefaces, it's just, I can't believe like they let something like this through.
Okay, so do you use nomadlist.com?
I do. I signed up for it 2 months ago. So I'm kind of in the discovery phase, and so far I haven't gotten that much value because, like, well, for those of you that don't know what nomadlist.com is, it's like a website where a lot of digital nomads kind of go and they can post questions. There's also like a Slack channel. So if a month ago when I first came to Praha, I joined the Praha channel and I was like, hey, who else is here? And then you don't really hear that many people. It's maybe like 2 people, and nobody actually wants to meet up. So I think the tool and the idea is great, but the community is not there. It's not engaging enough to, like, it's not there yet. Maybe in the future it will, but I haven't gotten a lot of value out of it.
Okay, so last question: Do you need to have a designer background to create great UX?
I don't think so. I think that question basically says, if you didn't come from a designer, is there any way that you can be a good designer in the future? And the answer is definitely no, because I'm passionate about education, and you guys have all made the time to come here to learn. And today you're going to leave being better app designers than before. And all you need to know is know what the legit resources are, and just consume those resources and go out there, actually do stuff and learn from your mistakes. And in today's world, you don't need to go to like a structured class. And a lot of times you can't go to a structured class to learn stuff like this because it's so bleeding edge. But there are lots of resources out there, like Apple stuff, like Google stuff, like the stuff on iTunes, that you can learn very, very quickly. And it's very, very like high fidelity content that you can pick up that knowledge.
Okay, so I guess that kind of answers also the next question. Do you have some good source of the inspiration for the UX?
Yeah, so those 6 app models that I explained, those are really good inspirations. There are websites out there that gives you a library of different UX patterns, and some of them are good, some of them are bad. But I would say anything that's officially created by the companies that design that ecosystem is a great resource, because they're essentially, it's their world, right? If you're designing stuff to be on their world, it helps to learn their language and their grammar, so that when you build things, it'll be more compatible with not only the present, but also in the future. Because when Apple write that documentation, it's not just for like iOS 10. They're thinking like iOS 11, iOS 12, all these different devices that hasn't been announced yet. They take all of that into consideration, and they'll write a guide. It's like, follow these rules if you want. So you should follow those rules, because later on, when new stuff pops out, it'll save you from the pain.
Okay, so again, thank you very much for the really great talk, and I hope you enjoyed your stay in Prague.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.